Recording.
1, 2, 3,
4, 5.
6.
Leslie Spence.
Kirsten Smith.
Saida Shahidi.
Gabriella Sneed.
Zena Shahidi.
Marissa Sutherland. Bulgaria is a small country off the Balkan Peninsula of Eastern Europe. The location, set perfectly between the Middle East and Europe, made it a natural pathway for travelers and eventually invaders. For hundreds of years, Bulgaria has suffered at the hands of an oppressive foreign invaders, and the effects of the rulers has changed the dynamics of this tiny Balkan country. Today we will talk about the Turkish yoke, communism, the need for codependency, what Bulgaria looks like today, the customs that came from both rulings, and how they treat the Turkish today.
The Turkish ruling began with the Turkish invasion of Bulgaria between the years of 1393 and 1396. And once invaded, the Turkish actions towards the Bulgarians were unfortunate, such as inhumane discrimination, forceful religion, and the blood tax. Ottoman rule was a period marked by oppression and misgovernment and represents a deviation of Bulgaria's development as a Christian European state. In 1393, Ottomans captured Tarnovo, the capital of the Second Bulgarian Empire, after a 3-month siege. In 1396, beaten Tarstem fell after the Christian crusade at the Battle of Nicopolis. With this, Ottoman Empire took over and ruled Bulgaria. Bulgarians in the Ottoman Empire rule had to endure inhumane discrimination. They paid extremely high taxes, had no legal rights. They were forbidden to bear arms, not allowed to wear bright colors, and required to build houses or church that stood higher than those of Muslim Turks. Although there were areas of Bulgaria that were not forced to change their religion, there were some areas that had to undergo forceful Islamization. If they did not convert to this change of religion, they were slaughtered, including their women or their wives and children. The blood tax, this act was known as kidnapping young male Bulgarian children. Once they were kidnapped, they were taken to Turkish host families and made into fanatic Muslims in Janissary corps. Once they were members of the corps, they were taken back to fight Bulgarians, and this resulted in some of them fighting their own families. The Ottoman Empire ruled for 5 centuries between the years of 1396 and 1878, known as the period of suffering and darkness of the Bulgarian people. The Ottoman Empire was marked by military defeats at the hands of Christian Europe and by the weakening of central authority. Russia and Austria were the first to see Turkey as a political ally. In 1878, Russia forced Turkey to give Bulgarians its independence after the Russo-Turkish War in 1878. At this time, Bulgaria had an opportunity for freedom and democracy before being invaded by communists.
During the communist regime, the communists in Bulgaria wanted control over everything, over religion, land, housing, economic growth, as well as people's peace. Those who regularly attended church had the fact that they were religious stamped on their ID card. This affected everything: their employment, their schooling, where they could live, who they could associate with. And because of such rulings, no one attended church regularly, and they did not want to be marked as religious. 5 days after Christmas, Grandfather Cole would come to their house, leaving gifts under the tree. They did this because they wanted the kids to believe more in Grandfather Cole instead of Santa Claus, to show that Christmas wasn't as important as the elders had said. Communists decided that everyone should work the land, so they gave everyone 1,000 square meters of land to farm on. They could farm on it, but they could not build on it. The people who were too poor to travel to their land didn't go, but those who could travel decided that they would go and build. If they did build, the officials tore down everything. Later they passed a law taking back the land. If they had built on it and the officials did not tear it down, they could keep the land. But if you had obeyed the law and just farmed on it, you would still have to give it back. Bulgarians woke up with the fear every day. They had a fear for waiting the death of their mother, the leaky pipes in the bathroom, and never being able to find a plumber, the random but frequent electricity cuts, the vague threat of an inspection at work, which could be the losing of their job, and the possibility of making some extra money by using your bathroom as a mushroom farm and then getting caught. Also, your undiagnosed medical condition and using home remedies to treat this. There are many setbacks in the economy during the communist regime, meaning you would have to fill cumbersome containers in order to flush the toilet and wash the dishes. They got used to washing clothes with cold water and a bar of soap. They also found a mysterious link between the toilet and the hole in the bathroom floor where the shower water was supposed to drain out. Since the fall of communism, Bulgarians have struggled to find and maintain their independent identity.
Bulgaria has struggled to find its own identity and often seeks to be mutually dependent with other countries and organizations. Bulgaria was willing to join any form of government to help them better their economy. Bulgaria was very poor and lacked resources to help the transaction of becoming independent. They seemed to agree to join anything that came their way if it seemed like it will improve their country's success. They seemed to have trouble with their neighboring countries, Romania, Serbia, Macedonia, Greece, and Turkey, which led them to an alliance with Germany during both world wars. Following World War II, a socialist government was instituted under the Soviet tutelage. While the idea was very appealing, it was almost impossible since they were under the Soviet tutelage. That led them to take a Soviet model for an economic development, which seemed great to get their economy up. On November 1989, the communist leader Todor Sivak participated in a reform process to dismantle the state of socialism. But later, in 1990 and 1991, they established a more democratic form of government, which regulates a representative elected president, a prime minister, and a cabinet. That led them to this flag, which represented independency. White means peace, green was hope and joy, and red was strength. Bulgaria strived for codependence with the EU, which seemed like it was such a long way to come true. But as of January 1st, 2007, they joined the EU, which was 17 years after the fall of communism. Even though the country is still one of the poorest countries that are a part of the EU stated that anyone who wanted to work should work. Bulgarian President Georgi Parnov said, "But let's make it clear, our future success as a nation depends not on European funds and resources, but on our own work." Before that, they were only a codependent country wanting to join the EU.
After the fall of communism in 1991, Bulgaria established to be a parliamentary democracy with a system of checks and balances between the executive, judicial, and legislative branch. The executive branch has a president which is a 5-year term and 1 re-election. The president's main duties are to schedule elections, represent Bulgaria abroad, conclude international treaties, and head the Consultative Council for National Security. The executive branch also consists of Council of Ministries that is run by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is responsible for carrying out state policy, managing the state budget, and maintaining law and order. The legislative branch is a National Assembly that consists of 240 deputies that are elected by popular vote every 4 years. Parliament is responsible for enactment of laws, approval of budget, scheduling of presidential elections, selection and dismissals of prime ministers and other ministers, declaration of war, deployment of troops outside of Bulgaria, and ratification of international treaties and agreements. The judicial branch consists of regional courts, district courts, appeal courts, system of courts, cassation, Supreme Administrative Court, and a system of military courts. The Supreme Judicial Council has charge of self-administration and organization of the judiciary. The National Assembly has formative powers over the other 2 branches, but after their formation they are independent. The current office holder in 2012 for the president is Rosen Plevneliev, who has been president since January 22, 2012. For the prime minister, it is Boyko Borisov, who has been prime minister since July 27, 2009. From the Turkish yoke to the communism to struggling to be an independent democracy, all helped shape the culture in Bulgaria.
The oppression in Bulgaria by the Turkish yoke and communism have left its mark and shaped many of their traditions. In some aspects, it has changed their culture to the very core. The music and folk dancing introduced into Bulgaria by the Ottoman Empire has had a large influence on Bulgarian culture, and their music has an Arabic sound from the specialized instruments that they use. This is a gadulka, and it is played it's similar to a violin, but played vertical instead of horizontal. Listen to the sound of this clip and see how it has Turkish influences. Each region across Bulgaria has its own ensemble with musicians that play the gadulka and other unique instruments, and dancers that dance the traditional folk songs. Another mark that was left on Bulgaria is how communism has changed their housing structure and the way that people live. For the communist regime to meet its goals in keeping people in oppression, they came through the cities and flattened most single-family homes. In their place, they built high-rise apartment buildings known as bloc. Somebody else do this in our regular, we'll talk about that. Moving the citizens into such a densely packed living area allowed the communist regime to keep a closer eye on their actions. Since the fall of communism, little has changed in regard to their housing options because it is not feasible to tear down the high-rise apartments and build single-family homes. The final and most drastic cultural change that I would like to mention is how Bulgarians communicate yes and no with their heads. During the Turkish yoke, Bulgarian monks had knives held to their throats and were told to deny Christianity. When asked if they believed in God, they shook their heads side to side, signifying to the Turks no outwardly. But they had made a pact in their hearts that it would mean yes. Bulgarians silently agreed to do this to spare their lives, but still honor their Christianity. This practice is still commonly used today throughout Bulgaria, where this means yes and this means no. It is one of the only known countries to use this inverted method of signifying yes and no. You can imagine, with globalization, how confusing cross-culture communication can be. The severe oppression by the Turkish yoke and communism left an indelible impression on Bulgarians, especially in their attitudes towards modern-day Turks.
Oppression of the ethnic Turks in Bulgaria today stems from a communist power struggle and a continued attempt to politicize a minority ethnic identity. The Turkish have since suffered a harsh and cruel form of domination with an attack on their culture, religion, and beliefs. To understand why the Turkish are shunned, the long history between the people of both Turkey and Bulgaria is important. When Bulgaria won the Ottoman-Russian War, the situation for the Turks changed drastically. Funds were withheld from Turkish schools, Turkish participation in political life was reduced, and they were forced to speak Bulgarian. Their religious practices and places of worship were greatly reduced in numbers. After 1934, Turkish political parties and organizations were banned, and the mass movement of Turkish immigrants out of Bulgaria began, as you can see in this picture here. The Bulgarian state attempted to integrate the Turkish minority into a proletariat brotherhood through Bulgarian-Turkish communist education. Bulgarian state provided numerous cultural institutions for Turks, and the women were de-veiled and provided classes to teach them to overcome the religious fanaticism. Today, the Turkish are considered to be the modern-day gypsies of Bulgaria and are still regarded as former enemies of their own homeland. As seen in this picture, the Turkish were kept in groups and watched like unruly animals. They were given low-paying jobs when the government failed them, with no promised jobs or a way of income. This is where the Turkish began to inherit the gypsy lifestyle. This life came with crime and pickpocketing, stealing, and breaking and entering. The children were kept out of school system to help earn money for the family. Since the early 1970s, the communist government has consistently cracked down on the Turkish minority. The removal of Turkish customs began with teaching Turkish being banned, letters to Turk with Islamic names were being sent back unknown, and phone calls were even interrupted with warnings not to speak Turkish. Bulgaria at one time took pride in being a safe haven for different ethnicities and was a model of ethnic tolerance. The People's Republic of Bulgaria during communism reigning from 1944 to 1990 took an extreme approach in politicizing ethnic identity. The Bulgarian Communist Party is guilty of a series of mass human rights violations against the ethnic Turks that share their homeland. The Turkish now suffer the same oppression they once inflicted on the people of Bulgaria.
Bulgaria has evolved both positively and negatively from the influences that caused centuries of oppression. This includes the Turkish yoke, the communist regime, and their strive for codependence. Bulgaria today and the treating of the Turkish today are the results that come from those three things.